so once you delve into the understanding of what that means, then what you will come to realize is that as works of antiquity, or the earliest works of things written, the Bible is the most trustworthy source ever written. And we'll get into that a little bit over time. And one of the things that they use to make that, in order to make that argument, is this. What they look at is how much time transpired between a thing happening and the first things that are ever written about that thing that happened. And what you'll find is that the distance, the time and distance between the life of Christ and the first works written about the life of Christ has the shortest distance of time and space between the events and what was written about it. The more time between the event and the recorded account of it, the less trustworthy the account is. And the life of Christ has the shortest time span of anything ever written of the event that took place and the first writings we find. Thus, based on that requirement or that data point, it's the most trustworthy works, early works ever written. And you'll see, if you look it up, you'll see comparisons made to a lot of things like Homer's Odyssey and Iliad, and a lot of the works that were written that we read in school. The time and distance from what they're writing about is so far more distant than the writings of Christ. And what they argue is that as a result, the writings of the life of Christ are the most trustworthy writings of antiquity ever written. That if you can't trust the Bible based on that standard, then you can't trust anything. So, let's see. He says, but what eyewitness accounts do we possess? Do we have the testimony of anyone who personally interacted with Jesus, who listened to his teachings, who saw his miracles, who witnessed his death, and who perhaps even encountered him after his alleged resurrection? Do we have any records from first century journalists who interviewed eyewitnesses, asked tough questions, and faithfully recorded what they scrupulously determined to be true? Equally important, he says, how well would these accounts withstand the scrutiny of skeptics? The New Testament scholar Mark Strauss says, we have actually very early attestations of the authorship of the Gospels. The early church father Papias, you can write his name down, Papias, as recorded by the church historian Eusebius, that is Eusebius, Eusebius identifies Mark's gospel as essentially the eyewitness account of Peter. The historian, the church father Papias, through the church historian Eusebius, identifies the Gospel of Mark as essentially the eyewitness account of Peter. Papias was a disciple of the Apostle John, so we are only one generation removed from Jesus himself.
Now that is a pretty close testimony and strongly suggesting that the Gospels are based on eyewitness accounts. The theologian and apologist J.P. Moreland says this: "It has become evident to the scholars of the first century that the Gospels were actually attempts to write biographies of Jesus. They are very clearly attempts by eyewitnesses to describe exactly what Jesus said and did. And the consensus of New Testament scholarship has moved in that direction." So I read Luke 1, verses 1 through 4. I'll read them again here from a different translation. "Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself," meaning Luke, "have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught." The same Mark Strauss, the New Testament scholar, says this: "Luke's gospel begins with a prologue." Those are those first 4 verses. "It is actually one of the finest Greek sections in the whole New Testament. Luke was clearly a literary artist, but in that prologue, he points out that he has carefully investigated the material that he presents in the Gospels, that he has checked the eyewitness accounts, those who were actually present. If you read that prologue, you see that this is the work of a historian. This was someone who has done his research." So Mark Strauss suggests that the 4 New Testament Gospels are biographies of Jesus. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all written in the first century, are all earliest and most reliable records of Jesus. Since they were written remarkably close to the actual occurrence of the events themselves, eyewitnesses, watch this, still living and present, would have objected to any inaccuracies, making the Gospels unlikely to be corrupted by legend and wishful thinking. I want you to ask yourself this question. Look at the logic of that, and do you agree with that logic? And if you do or do not, why not? Since they were written remarkably close to the actual occurrence of the events themselves, there would be eyewitnesses that were there who would have still been present and alive, that if they were not telling the truth, would have called them on their untruths, on any inaccuracies. And so if they were there and would have called them on it, then does that make it unlikely that they could be corrupted by legend or wishful thinking? Do you agree or disagree? We'll talk about that in a minute, so write that down. Do you agree or disagree? The New Testament scholar Craig Bloomberg says this: "Consider the way the Gospels are written. In a sober and responsible fashion, with accurate incidental details, with obvious care and exactitude. You don't find the outlandish flourishes and blatant mythologizing that you see in a lot of other ancient writings." A lot of things, this means that what we find is that there's a lot of oral tradition that is now written. Some things were written by eyewitnesses, some things were written by people through oral tradition, people telling their stories, and those stories being categorized and written. And so talking about the level of accuracy behind oral traditions, and then talking about influence of the tradition of the Jews. But I want to talk about something. I want to use a particular story about Jesus healing the centurion servant. And I'm going to talk about something because how many people have heard, I want to do something here. I don't normally do. I'm going to remove my pen. I'm going to go, no, I won't remove it. I want you to answer this question in the chat. I want you to answer this question in the chat. So let me pin myself back. Let me answer this question in the chat. If you have ever heard and or said, probably more heard than said, that the Bible can't be trusted because there are a bunch of inaccuracies in the Bible. How many people have heard that? If your camera's on, you can either wave your hand. Yeah, I see a couple hands wave. If you don't want to turn your camera on, type it in the chat. I've heard that. If you've heard that before, that the Bible has inaccuracies, and that makes the word untrustworthy. So let's look at one of them. Jesus heals the centurion servant, described in Matthew chapter 8, verses 5 through 13, and then in Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. You can read them on your own, but I'm going to talk about the contradiction. So Matthew says that the centurion asked Jesus to heal his servant. Luke says that the centurion sent others to ask Jesus to heal the servant. If you look at that, so Jesus heals a centurion servant. Matthew says that the centurion asked Jesus to heal the servant. Luke says that the centurion sent others to ask Jesus to heal the servant. So if you've never heard it before, you just heard it because I just showed you that there is what looks like a contradiction. One said the centurion asked him. The other one said the centurion sent his servants to ask him. Now I want to ask a question, and then I want to show you something. This one I do want a response. So I want you to unmute your platform. I want somebody to answer this question for me. If there was something that happened, and let's say the police came and investigated this incident, a crime was committed, and the police were called. And when the police showed up and began to question several people who said they were eyewitnesses to what transpired, what do you think the police would think if everybody's story was exactly the same? Anybody?